Let Heim cook. Welcome back to Cardinals on My Time, and there's plenty of news surrounding the Cardinals today. But before we get into the big update surrounding Nolan Arenado, I wanted to first provide an update on my end. It's good to see you. Thanks for coming. Welcome in to Cardinals on My Time.
I've been thinking about this, Mr. Hand. If I'm here and you're here, doesn't that make it our time?
Starting this week, I had officially joined on over at Redbird Rundown, and I got to tell you, I could not be more excited. We have tons of stuff on deck, and in case you missed it, check out our new Redbird Rundown YouTube channel to see our first episode together where we discussed Mason Wynn and what we believe his offensive ceiling could be. I wanted to take this moment before we get going to thank the guys over at Redbird Rundown for giving me this chance, but also for everybody that has been a part of this Cardinals journey so far. So let me first start out with Josh Jacobs at Redbird Rants, Jeremy Carpet, Interstate 70 Sports Media, and then lastly, Jake Wood at Viva Alberto's for giving me the opportunity and the platforms to share my takes that really nobody in the house here cares about. Now, I couldn't be more excited to get more involved with Redbird Rundown and the guys over there, Matt, Jonathan, and Andy. Those three brothers over there kind of gave me that first opportunity to look into the podcast world. The next opportunity for me is actually coming this weekend, where I somehow and incredibly got invited to receive media credentials for this year's Cardinals winter warm-up. Not sure how it happened, but I could not be more thankful for this opportunity to sit into the interview room and talk to the players and coaches. It's fair to say imposter syndrome is hitting hard right about now. But anyway, let's get back to Jake Wood. All right, so in an effort to repay that favor, I invited Jake Wood to join me today to talk about the Nolan Arenado deal, along with tying up some other Cardinals odds and ends. So before Jake gets the opportunity to brag about himself, I'll talk about him a little bit. Jake is a major reason for the growth and success of the Cardinals SB Nation site Viva Alberto's, and would just not leave me alone until he was able to make it happen and eventually got me over there to join him and the team on SB Nation. So before we get into the Nato talk, Jake, welcome on. Great to have you. I appreciate your theatrics as always. But before we get into the Cardinals deal, let's tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, and then we'll talk Bloom's first season.
Yeah, Scott, this is weird. I'm normally behind a blank screen, and so being on video, I don't know what to do with my hands. So I guess I'll just put them down or something. I maybe the Italian comes out and I start talking with them. But anyway, yeah. So I started my own podcast called Rambling Redbirds maybe a little over 2 years ago, and that was met with a lukewarm reception, which, at the time it was just an opportunity to do something that I've always wanted to do. I love talking about the Cardinals. I love talking Cardinal baseball. I love getting deep into the whys and the hows. And I think that kind of allowed me to pursue opportunities such as Viva Alberto's after Jason Hill decided that he wanted to go in a new direction. It was certainly big shoes to fill for that site, but after taking it over, thankfully in the last 14-ish months or so since I've joined VEB, our following has quadrupled in that time. So it's really been an awesome thing to kind of watch grow, and it has been steady growth. And sometimes I find myself being harder on myself, expecting more and wanting more. And obviously, the world we live in, we always want instant gratification and success, but that's not kind of how this works. You have to build something, and you have to prove why somebody should invest in listening to your opinions and your thoughts. And like you said, I after an amount of time, I realized that the initial mix that we had there wasn't quite correct, and so I was in contact with you, and I read a lot of your stuff, and we had a really good chemistry going back and forth. We worked well together, and so I reached out to you, and I was very aggressive about making sure that I got who I wanted in this scenario, because I think fans read into chemistry between people just as much as they do the content, and so I think having the opportunity and the ability to work with people you really do enjoy working with, and Gabe alongside us on Viva Alberto's, I think we have a really good thing going right now. And I think that a lot of the growth that is starting to take place now is because people are starting to buy into what we have finally put together. And obviously for in 2026 terms, I'm very excited about what we have planned and what's coming.
Yeah, the chemistry is something definitely that we could speak of. I mean, I got to meet you in person at the Cardinals Blogger Day, and unfortunately, you had to bring up a John Gant reference, so that kind of shudders to me. But it also, this guy knows ball. If he's pulling out John Gant over here in 2025, and then we ended up spending the game kind of going back and forth, talking back and forth. So that was a lot of fun, and I'm very excited with what we've been doing at VB, and it's just a different challenge to reach that different audience compared to the different outlets that I am working with, because the comments, the readers, the very ravenous fans that eat, live, breathe Cardinals, like, they are going to fact check you. They are going to, if there's something they don't agree with, they're going to make sure you know it, but they do it in a way that's educated with that background research as well. So it's not only the writers that are doing the research, it's also the audience that's doing the research. So it's definitely a fun challenge, and it's something that has made my content, I feel like, go to the next level.
The readers, they do a good job of helping you grow and making you better and making sure that you have your resource information correct and is accurate, because if it's not, they're not afraid to tell you about it. And so you better make sure you come with the goods, because if not, you're going to hear about it and people are going to tell you they don't like what you have to say. And so it's trying to take everything with that grain of salt, and trying to be better going forward, because at the end of the day, if they don't enjoy what we're doing, then we're not doing what we're paid to do, is create content for that group of people first and foremost. But we also want to be as inclusive as possible, and as many fans as possible to buy in and enjoy what we are trying to do at Viva Alberto's.
Well, to bring it back into the podcast that we are both currently on, into Cardinals on My Time, I wasn't planning to do anything today, but duty calls. Today we heard around lunchtime that Nolan Arenado was traded, so now Cardinals on My Time becomes Cardinals on Their Time for this evening, and I was very excited to get this opportunity to get Jake on, because we were going to wait for a little bit of a tease that we got coming up, potentially a little bit later here for you. But excited to have him on to kind of see what Heim's been cooking. So I was considering this Nolan Arenado trade the most necessary trade that the Cardinals had to make this offseason. And it was regardless of who they got, where he went, the money and everything like that. Because last year we were hearing all about this transition season, and I promised I'd leave the word in 2025, but the runway that we expected, it didn't happen, for one reason or another. I don't blame Arenado for using his no trade clause. That's why he has it. But we did see how him sticking around did kind of send St. Louis back a little bit further, as we're kind of in this question mark period again at the infield. So things are changing in St. Louis, though, since Chaim Bloom has taken full control. He started dealing by Sonny Gray and Wilson Contreras to Boston, his old employer, to clear up payroll and then some playing time for that 2025 word for the younger players. Bloom got plenty of pitchers in return in both deals, and continued in the pitching market with a slew of minor league deals to go along with his highest profile signing of starter Dustin May. All of this well and good to me, minus the Contreras deal. I still miss you, buddy. I still think he had a role as a bridge guy here as the outfield gets sorted, but that's a conversation for another day. But the continued presence of Arenado on the roster was starting to get me worried. We can go back to my last Cardinals on My Time, where I was like, are we hitting the panic button a little bit too early? The third base market was slow to pick up, leading to Bloom being like, hey, if we don't find a taker for Arenado, that's fine. He's going to stay here and he won't be released. And I think that would have been kind of the worst case scenario for everyone. Unfortunately, that year-plus long saga came to an end today. And when I say fortunately, that is no stab to Nolan Arenado. That is no stab to anything that he's done, who he is, what he's hopefully going to be, because I do hope he's going to do good things in his next stop. It was just that, again, that necessary trade when Chaim Bloom called somebody other than the Red Sox for the first time this offseason, besides some minor deals, to make a trade. So early this afternoon, he called and sent Nolan Arenado to the Arizona Diamondbacks, along with $26 million in exchange for 2025 eighth round draft pick Jack Martinez. I was never one, again, to be worried about what the return was prospect wise, or otherwise, for Nolan Arenado. But Bloom appears once again targeted what he's been doing since he came on around the draft time. So I'll let Jake kind of tell me what his thoughts are on the deal, and then you can also talk about Martinez and where that kind of puts us here.
Yeah, so Nolan Arenado, like you mentioned, traded to Arizona. I think this is good for the Cardinals in the short term because it allows, more opportunity for younger players to get more extensive playing time at the big league level. You talk about like a JJ Wetherholt, for example. You were actively looking for the opportunity to give this kid, as I know this is a dirty word, but runway to take off in 2026. And when I think about what Nolan Arenado has meant to the Cardinals over the last 5 or so seasons, and that leadership and the veteran presence and all of those things, it will be missed. And like you mentioned, with Wilson Contreras and Sonny Gray also being dealt this offseason, the Cardinals are having a mass exodus of veteran leadership out the door. Now they did also, make the Ryan Stanek move official this afternoon as well. So like that will help a little bit in that regards. But you know, from the Cardinals' perspective, giving JJ that clear runway, there is no there's no pressing need to have to trade Brendan Donovan now. Like you can still have JJ up to start the season, and you can still go in with no with Brendan Donovan on your roster if the right deal does not materialize. And so I want to caution Cardinals fans just a little bit. Some that find that, it is an absolute must that Brendan Donovan must be traded this offseason. It's not a must. It is a must if the right offer comes across the table. Like he's out there and he's available, and it would behoove the Cardinals to move him because if they don't anticipate keeping him around long term, you want to maximize that asset as soon as possible. But if that does not come to fruition, and I know we'll talk about this a little bit later with Brendan Donovan. If that doesn't come to fruition, you can simply keep him at second base. You can play JJ at third. And, I realize that you could perhaps potentially, use Nolan Gorman at DH. Like I think that the Cardinals are still, at least the new regime is interested in giving Gorman, another look this season. And, I'm somebody who is a little bit out on Gorman. I think that at this point, 1,500, plate appearances in the major leagues, we have a pretty good idea, pretty good sample size of what that player, that profile looks like. And I don't think that we're going to see a whole lot more, a bigger step out of him, if you will. But if the Cardinals, front office still wants to have that one, season where they're fully in control and they want to, put a couple of their tweaks on him and see what that does and what happens, then sure, fine. Let's see, what it looks like again. I don't mind, in a season where the results on the field aren't going to be as important as the growth and the development of the franchise as a whole. If you want to see if you can get something, have him take that extra step forward to make him a more marketable piece going into next offseason, I'm fine with that. Perhaps he does enough at the deadline and teams come calling about Nolan Gorman. That would be fantastic. Same thing with Brendan Donovan. I mean, the Cardinals are going to have, in my mind, I'm almost interested to see if the Cardinals decide to almost like, livestock is the wrong word, I think, but you look at like Matthew Liberatore, and I don't know if you put Alec Burleson in this category or not, but guys who are either in arbitration, going through arbitration, are getting closer to free agency, guys with multiple years of control. We see teams value that highly. And so I wonder if guys who still have a little bit of control remaining to them are treated a little bit like livestock, and they're just sold off to the highest bidder after
Mhm.
after they show something in 2026. And so I continue to wonder about that. There's no pressing need to do any of that, but if an opportunity that's too good to be true comes up, would they move on a player who has enough term left on and their eligibility with the team? Getting back to the Nolan Arenado of it all, I think this is good for Nolan, and looking at it from the Arizona perspective, I think this is great for Nolan. You know, you go to Arizona where the ballpark factors are a lot more in favor of the hitters than Busch Stadium is, and so I think that that alone is a nice little boost, perhaps for him. And I also would say that Cardinals fans, there's a high possibility that, you know, Arenado produces offensively a little bit more than what we had been seeing, you know,
I hope he
and those
does.
numbers, the stat line is, yeah, absolutely. I want nothing but success for him, but at the same time, I know how this narrative works. Cardinal fans are going to watch Nolan Arenado go somewhere else and produce better than he was here in St. Louis, and fans are going to point, you know, fingers back at the organization of the franchise, and why couldn't he do that here? And it's like,
Mhm.
well, you got to also consider the factors of he's going to play on a better team for one. He's playing in a better ballpark that's more conducive to offense, and you know, I just think that putting him back in that winning environment will once again reignite the best out of him. And so I would say that it's not exactly a fair comparable. And you point back to the Cardinals and say, why couldn't he have been that here or over the last 3 years at least? And
Mhm.
you're probably going to see, you know, that similar shades of what we saw from the old Nolan Arenado going into 2026 would be my expectation. And I have had a couple conversations with, you know, people around his camp, and, you know, they told me that they don't believe that what he's been experiencing is age related decline. They believe it has been a mechanical issue. They believe that it has
Mm.
been health related. There were certain aspects that, you know, led to him not being as productive as he expects himself to be, and that has been what has caused, you know, his drop in production. They still see him, you know, moving well through the zone. They still see him, you know, on a daily basis, doing all the things that he's always been able to do. You know, from their perspective, obviously people around the player are going to pump the player up a little bit more. They're going to say all the really, really nice positive things, but, you know, you have to have that self internal belief to, you know, play this game at this highest level. So I like it for Arizona. I like that it opens up opportunities for the Cardinals, and I really hope that, you know, it winds up being, you know, what both sides needed in the end. I just hope everyone has fun. That's really at the end of the day. That's
Well, for more insight like that, nothing but positivity, make sure you follow at woodbat28 on Twitter. And then make sure you check again that stuff over on Viva Alberto's. But I agree. I don't think that we need to be worried about, and I'm going to put it in quotes, the risk of trading Nolan Arenado and seeing what he could potentially do elsewhere. I mean, being in Arizona does not intentionally hurt the Cardinals like if he were to go somewhere in the division, which I don't think was ever an option anyway. And it just again clears up that opportunity, which is going to kind of bring me back to you started teasing on a little bit. I thought you were going one way, then you kind of swerved on me, and you keeping me guessing. But I wanted to kind of bring it to what this Arenado deal actually means for the Cardinals this year. You've talked about just a few minutes ago that JJ Wetherholt is going to get that runway. You could see that, and then they also going with Nolan Arenado. So I want to get into, or sorry, I'm Nolan Gorman. So before I get into my takes, I'll first ask you, Jake, because I think now from your kind of little ideas that we might be a little bit different. So as of this moment, right now, January 13th, 8:55 p.m. Central Standard Time, who in the Cardinals system had the most to gain with this trade? And that could either be someone that hasn't been gained further down the road, or kind of when I was thinking of this question, who, as of this moment, is the Cardinals starting third baseman?
I think it's not just one specific player. I would pick out three. I would give it to Weatherholt, Sajasi, and Gorman. I think have the most to gain from this, because it now opens up clear competition. I could easily see a situation unfolding in spring training where, you know, any of the three really take their opportunity and run with it, and perhaps that leads to an opening day, you know, starting position for any of those three. You know, they say you know, competition brings the best out in everybody, and so i don't think that I don't think it's a slam dunk that JJ Weatherholt starts opening day in the major leagues. You know, I've talked to a couple different people within the Cardinals, and I asked the question, like, you know, what, you know, obviously has been not ramifications, but like guardrails put in place to kind of dissuade service time manipulation. But there is
Mhm.
also the incentive of the player winning that rookie of the year and getting that extra additional draft pick. But because the Cardinals are essentially starting ground zero year one, we could say that the rebuild started 2-3 years ago, but now that all the pieces are actually cleared out, this is ground zero right now. Everything
Mhm.
is torn down. Does it make the most fiscal sense to start his clock at the beginning of 2026 whenever there's so much uncertainty? How far out does that go? Does it make sense to hold him back in the name of service manipulation, but maybe they'll say he's just not quite ready defensively wherever we want to put him, whatever. There are ways to, say it around it and and gain that additional year. And, the feedback that I got from that conversation was that those are you're asking the right questions. Those are the internal debates that we're having right now as to what's best for us going forward. And some of those conversations do revolve around JJ Weatherholt. Now granted, if he goes into spring training and absolutely just sets the world on fire and there's not a thing they can do about like justifying holding him back, he will be in St. Louis start opening day. They made that very clear as well. But if he just doesn't quite have the spring that he wants or that the team wants, it's not a for sure given that he starts in St. Louis on opening day. I want to make that clear, but I don't expect that to be the case. I do think that inevitably he will start in St. Louis on opening day. Thomas Ajacey back in 2023 was the Texas League MVP, and even through to 2024, early parts of 2024, whenever or late parts of 2024, whenever Sajasi was playing in Memphis, he still showed that he has a capable enough bat. And I think that we started to see flashes of Sajasi last season, find a little bit of his footing at the major league level. And I kind of wonder if he went into this offseason and tried to build upon kind of where he was going with that. And perhaps that takes a big step forward. And maybe that is more of a solution at third base, going into next season and going forward than a Wetherholt, than a Nolan Gorman, who has a significant track record of performance that we have seen. And it sometimes goes really well. It sometimes completely craters and goes completely off the rails. So I think that there is enough upside, but there's also a whole lot of volatility in Nolan Gorman. I hope that eventually he figures it out and puts it all together, but nothing he has done so far in the first, again, I keep referencing this 1,500 plate appearances at the big league level. That's the same amount that Dylan Carlson had whenever he was traded to the Tampa Bay Rays. So like we have a good sample on what Nolan Gorman is at this point, but you can never count out a player, making an adjustment and suddenly everything clicks and it goes forward. You just never know. But I would say
Well,
those
I
three.
want to
I
jump
don't
in
know
and
that I can
first say
pick one. Yeah.
I want to first say bringing slander on both Dylan Carlson and Nolan Gorman, who I'm still in love with both, in the same sentence is going to give us some cause for conversation. But that's again story for a different day. Continue on.
I
Oh,
don't
thank
think you can
goodness.
pick
So
out just one. I think there's three players that ultimately benefit from this. And it doesn't
this,
necessarily undo the log jam, but it does help alleviate some of the tensions.
yeah, the Sajasi one is a great kind of what's it called, an under the radar pick for who could be benefiting from this. 2 weeks ago, my VEB weekly Sunday article, go and check over there, was saying Sajasi is the biggest loser from the inactivity. He was kind of thrown around all over the place, up, down. Even when he was up, he wasn't playing. And then when he was playing, it was like, oh, Mason Wynn got hurt pregame and you're now playing shortstop when you're normally playing somewhere else within the infield or something like that. So I agree that this JC one is going to be definitely one to keep an eye on. And the Weatherholt one, I think they could easily, if they wanted to, pull that Chris Bryant. Hey, he's learning a new position, because he did still play primarily shortstop. With them knowing full well that Mason Wynn has that spot on lock. I think it was a good move to have them do that, where he's only kind of focusing on adjusting to the pro game while also dabbling in the other positions while not doing the full Jordan Walker of adjusting to the pro game and a new position at the same time. So to kind of go back to my original question of who does this immediately impact, or if I had to on now 9:02 January 13th, who is the starting third baseman? And it might just be because of the card collection that I have, just hoping that it stops collecting dust and can eventually turn into some value, is that Nolan Gorman that you are so out
Oh,
on. And I don't want to say so out on, but I understand it. I understand it, but I also am just still intrigued. He's still young. Yeah, he has those 1,500 at bats, but and then there's always a but. There's always a but. He went through the position change as well. I thought he did well in his first season as a second baseman while juggling the change and handling major league pitching, showing that 30 home run power. And then comes the back issues, then comes the strikeout issues that continue to pop themselves up. We did see a little bit of growth in the plate discipline as far as drawing walks. He was still swinging and missing plenty and plenty and plenty, but I did think that the approach was there. Even, it's tough to kind of determine in the last month of a lost season where who are you facing? Are you facing a team that has their number one pitcher trying to gather a postseason spot, or are you playing somebody who's already out, just like the Cardinals were, and they're trying to work on some things? So I think that last month is kind of tough to also put too much weight into that. But I think that right now, if the Cardinals or if Ali Marmol had to write a lineup, I would not be surprised at all to see Nolan Gorman over there at third base. And I think that's going to stay that way until Brendan Donovan is traded. I just like the 30 homer potential from second base. I know he's that quick, like in this year where you're saying maybe they think and it could just be something as simply as Wetherholt just does not do well in spring training. Well, there you go. They made that decision easy, kind of like you're saying. I do still think Wetherholt is going to be that future in the infield. I do think it's going to probably be at second
yeah.
base. Absolutely. It's very, very, very exciting to think of Mason Wynn and JJ Weatherholt up the middle for, I'm hoping, for a decade. But for this year right now, where there are so many question marks throughout the entire roster, let's give Nolan Gorman, let's hit that 2,000 at bat mark, and then let's talk.
Another 500 at bats will really, make a change, but we'll see. I will say the one thing that I'm intrigued by with Nolan Gorman is the fact that he had the highest walk percentage last season of any player on the team, even outpacing Lars Nootbaar. And so like that is interesting to me, but I still need to see him avoid those deep valleys. Right. I need to see him even out a
Of
little
course.
bit more to find more consistency for me to buy into him as like someone who you can rely on. I think there's way too much peak and valley involved in there, and if you can eliminate even some of the valley and like you still like players are gonna inevitably find dips in their game, but if you can keep it from cratering and just kind of keep a little dip, like most major league players, I think I can buy into that a little bit more, but also perhaps it just allows the Cardinals to move him out and get something for him that's a little more interesting if he finds some traction, because obviously his profile contains a lot of volatility. And so selling high on that asset would also make a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And part of this conversation is going to change if and when Brendan Donovan is traded. You have been in the camp of, you just said it even right now, they do not have to trade him. They have to trade him if the right deal comes across, which I think is a very good way to put it. So there was some Brendan Donovan updates today. So we could talk that pretty fast. Jeff Passan says that the Giants are, quote, aggressively pursuing Brendan Donovan. We heard them as favorites earlier, I believe, with the Mariners, and that seems like around Thanksgiving time or so, something like that. So now we kind of cooled on the Mariners apparently, and now the Giants appear to be checking back in now that the market's moving a little bit. So Jake, what do you think about the Giants, the Donovan deal? Is there anything you'd like from the Giants? Do you prefer one destination over another?
Well, I mean, I would prefer Seattle. Obviously, their pipeline is much stronger, much more stout, much more able to absorb the Cardinals. Plucking a couple more high end pieces in the Giants system would be able to. I'm not over the moon about the Giants system, but I do think they do have some pieces that are, interesting at the very least. I do like the DSL breakout player Yoswar Gonzalez, who's now finding his way into some of the top 100 lists. Is that absolutely realistic? I don't know. I'm not over the moon about Gavin Kylan. I think he's decent. I think he's more closer to the mold of like JJ Wetherholt, Gavin Kylan is, but with a not nearly as good hit tool. And so I think that he's just going to be one of those players who's like, average to just slightly above average, everything across the board. Speaking of Gavin Kylan, and I don't see the upside in that type of talent. So I don't know that I would be all that inspired by that as a return. Same thing with Carson Wisenhunt. He reminds me a lot of Quinn Matthews in some ways, where it's primarily fastball changeup. It's more pitchability than it is overpowering stuff. And we've seen the Cardinals lean more heavily into at least in the last calendar year or so with the players that they've brought into the organization. They like big guys with big fastballs who that's kind of your northern light whenever you're trying to assess what the Cardinals might have interest in. But they also, for a time with like Richard Fitz and Yoiker Fajardo, Blake Aida is another one, took some guys that have bad fastballs. And apparently that's kind of like a more new in vogue trend because it allows like they indirectly get different shapes on their fastballs just because of how poor it is, and it actually allows them to do better, like get better results with other pitches. I don't know the best way to explain it. I'm still kind of learning about it myself, but um excuse me. I do think that the Giants are interesting. I do think that if they decide to pony up and give something the Cardinals can't walk away from, that would ultimately be, a solution to a situation. But I also don't know, like, I know there are going to be some fans out there that clamor for like Bryce Eldridge. I don't think the Giants would be at all willing to entertain Bryce Eldridge in a deal for Donovan. I don't think they have any intention of doing that. I think they want to have Eldridge and Devers in their lineup every day, and I think that uh, I don't know what it would take to get Eldridge from the Giants, but I don't think that it would be just Donovan alone if you're going to even, start to convince them to be able to pry him away. So I don't know. I don't of the Giants of it all. I think there's a couple of interesting pieces, but I think outside of that, I would be underwhelmed with the Giants. Obviously, the Mariners have a more extensive collection of young talent that would make the Cardinals look better from a PR perspective, I would say, if they decided to go out and trade Brendan Donovan, because the return they would get back would ultimately, I think, have a higher ceiling. And so that would be my preference, is like at this point, you don't really need a whole lot, but you need to get the best upside available, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so they're not going to target the bad fastball, which I want to say I was doing before it was cool. I definitely debuted that bad fastball strategy plenty early, but I didn't have the even average secondary stuff to play
Me
off of
too.
that. So bad fastball, bad secondary, bad everything.
Mm-mm.
There we are. Um, one more one more little bit of
I'm just
news
bad
that
at everything.
yeah, hey, we try to take little wins here and there, especially when they're so rare, but hey, take what you can
You
get.
see this face?
Um,
I can't win anywhere. I don't have any hair. It's going off the rails.
unusual face for radio. But let's there's one little other piece of news that came in a little bit. The MLB Network Top 100 is debuting. It debuted about an hour ago as of this recording. And Ivan Herrera actually checks in at number
Ooh, I haven't
20,
seen this
sorry,
yet.
at number 98. Yeah, Ivan Herrera, Cardinals
Hmm.
catcher, we're going to say for right now, checks in at number 98 in MLB Network's top 100. So, Jake, let's get your live reaction here in the news.
Wow. 98. That's a nice place to start for him, I guess. Debuting in the top 100. I think the bat plays. I think that I'm curious to see how they handle the catching situation. I wonder if the extent is that he comes into spring training, they put him through some tests, they see what it's like, and ultimately that's a pass fail situation. Because having Herrera DHing and giving a Crooks Pajes tandem behind the plate, I think would make more sense for the long term because I'm not convinced that Herrera is a catcher long term. Obviously, I understand the value of Herrera being a catcher and having that bat at that position makes him very valuable. I
Mhm.
understand that. I'm not convinced of his ability to throw out runners. I'm not certain that I understand that he wasn't properly prepared by the previous regime, as Heim Bloom has been quoted, and giving him all the necessary tools to be the best catcher defensively that he could be. And so I am willing to look past that, but also recognizing that that was part of the equation for why I saw him as a flawed catcher, and more so
Mhm.
when I looked at Ivan Herrera, the carrying tool is the bat. And I want to make sure we highlight the bat without detracting from that while chasing value. What the certainty of the value that is in Ivan Herrera is in the bat. And investing and relying and leaning on that aspect of Ivan Herrera is what I'm most interested in doing. Now, if he's able to take this opportunity where he is the catcher and is able to take it and run with it and catch 60, 70, 80 games this season, terrific. You have a catcher who has a lot of upside and value in him. Perhaps that might be another player they might look to trade with some other options coming down the pike. I would hate it, but where's the value going to come in? Where are you going to get your stars? And he's already got 3 or 4 years of I'm sorry, 2 or 3 years of his service time out of the way. You start doing these math problems, and it's like, okay, if Herrera is a catcher and he can hit like that, he's going to be immensely valuable, and you can get more pieces for your rebuild going forward. I know Cardinals fans would hate it. I would hate it. I like Ivan Herrera. I love watching him hit. But when you think long term, and has been stressed to me over and over and over and over and over and over again to Cardinals people that I have talked to throughout this offseason, it is always the same message going forward. It is long term vision. And I keep continuing to have this little buzzing thought in the back of my brain of like, who of the young players that have a little bit more control are they going to look at to flip for another piece to take this rebuild to the next level? Is like, I don't know.
Mhm.
I keep thinking about it and I keep wondering about it. Obviously, I don't think they're in any hurry to make those moves at this point, but I keep wondering about it.
And that's fair, and that's something that we're gonna be wondering probably for the next 5 years. And I'll touch on the Von Herrera thing really quick, and then we'll wrap this thing up, is I think his progression at the plate might be on hold anyway, or not his progression, his valuation might be, like, kind of have an expiration date because of the catchers that we mentioned that are coming up. Like, I think maybe he's just holding it over for right now, and if it works, great. Like you're saying, that's great value if you can have, and then if he does what he does at the catching position, he's in the silver slugger conversation. If not, then I think he could also, they mentioned it when he was rehabbing one of the other knee injuries or maladies from behind the plate, is that he had the potential to work out in the outfield. There's your right-handed power
Yep.
outfield, the outfielder that you've been looking at. But that's, again, we don't want to deal with all these position changes at the major league level. Let's let the guy deal with what he came up to be, which is that next major league catcher. So here it is, the end of the first official Cardinals on My Time episode under the Redbird Rundown podcast name. So as I said earlier, we are planning some super cool stuff in the very near future. I'm going to go ahead, and if I say it, then that means we have to do it. Jake and I are going to be at winter warm-up this weekend, and if all goes well, we're going to hope to do kind of a Saturday recap show after we've been out at the interviews all day in Busch Stadium. So if we can figure out a live stream, we'll try it. If not, expect something to come out either that evening or something very early in the morning, because we want to try to get that news out to you. I want to see what it's like covering that first winter warm-up, and Jake's going to kind of be my mentor heading over to that, and that's news to him because he didn't know that until right about now. So like I said, make sure that for that information you're
No, I knew
following.
it.
So in order to look for that stuff in the near future, make sure you're following the Redbird Rundown podcast on YouTube. Follow them on Twitter and Facebook, but you can also find me in my usual spots, Mr. Plastastic17 on Twitter. I will definitely still be posting on over there, as well as the Cardinals on My Time podcast. But before we wrap this up, Jake, thank you so much for coming on. Kind of short notice, but if you could please give one more shout out to everybody, the thousands and millions at home, where they could come find you.
Yep. You can all find me at Woodbat28 on basically anywhere you go. You know, that was odd. So like you could go and find me on X at Woodbat28. You can find me at Viva Alberto's at Jake Wood 20 Jake underscore Wood 28. I'm pretty easy to find, and if you don't know where to find me, ask Scott. Scott will tell you. And that's just about it. You know, we're working on making 2026 better than 2025 was. And, you know, I've got some really cool things stashed away in the vault that, you know, you guys will be all privy to as we get further down the trek of this year. And I'm really excited to unveil it. And I'm really excited for everyone to see what we've been working on.
Well, again, I want to thank Jake for taking the time of coming on. I am Scott Plaza. This was Cardinals on My Time. Thanks for hanging out.